Hi, Carl here for ProAV and I'm at Panasonic HQ here to take a nifty little first look at their prototype versions of the S1Rs. So I've got two here and they're slightly different. One works but we're not allowed to put a battery in it. The other one is completely not working, complete dummy model, but that's this one. It is the right textures and everything's in the right places and this feels about right. So it's a bit of an odd situation where we naturally know very few specs about these. We know that the S1R is a high resolution model and the S1 is the low resolution model. We know that they're the first full frame cameras to do 4K 60p, but we don't know much more really other than that. But we have been able to look at the actual physical ergonomics of it. And this is something which I think is really interesting. They've always been quite good at ergonomics, Panasonic. If you look at the GH5 and the GH5S, they didn't go for the almost like the Sony way of thinking where you try and keep it as small as possible to make it really small, lightweight, mirrorless camera. They kept the mirrorless part of it and all the features, but they made it slightly chunkier. Now, part of this is for processing and cooling, obviously, and that's how they're able to do all the things which they can do, but a large part of it is how it feels in the hand. And I think they've taken that one step further with this. This instantly, the first time you pick it up, this feels right. It feels like a professional camera. It fits perfectly in your grip. And one really nice touch I really like is that the little lip at the top, which might in a photograph look a little bit uncomfortable, but when you hold it, it supports the top of your fingers nicely, and it means that your fingers are supporting the weight of the lens at the front of the camera without having to do anything. It really helps with balance, and it's just that small little touch which makes a huge difference. The texture on this model, on this one it's the production prototype and the texture feels very strange. On this one, which is how it's going to be on the final model, it feels great. Really, really, really nice to hold in the hands. I'm going to swap back to this one because this is the actual working one where all the buttons work and talk through some of the layout of the buttons. All the buttons are very, very responsive, a little clicky, and they feel very, very tactile, which really helps when you're, of course, you're using it like this up to the eye. You need to be able to feel where everything is instinctively without having to take your eyes and look and see where the button is. You can instantly feel where the buttons are and where they aren't, and each one of them is laid out differently to feel distinctive, and they're very, very easy to access with just your thumb and your finger here. Apart from obviously these ones, which you're obviously going to have to use the second hand for to change modes and stuff like that. But all the important things like the dials, the white balance buttons, the record buttons, the joysticks, the menus, all of that is done here with your right hand without having to move it at all. The new lens mount on the front, so this is Leica's mount, feels very, very robust. Sometimes with micro 4/3 lens mounts on their smaller models, you can feel a little bit of play in the lens. There's none of that here at all. It's a very, very secure connection between the lens and the body. The tilting screen is nice. So it's had a lot of criticism for not having a flip out one like we've seen on some other models and people are used to on the GH5 and GH5S, but they've done this for sturdiness. Like my first thought was actually that this doesn't look that sturdy. This looks like something that's a bit easy to break, but they said this is actually a securer mechanism and stronger and more stable than the flip out screen. And I guess it's also probably quite important for weather sealing, because that is a big deal here. Both the S1 and the S1R are fully weather sealed cameras. Panasonic have made a big point about saying that the weather sealing on this should be just as good as the top end DSLRs that we're used to. So things like Nikon's D850 and Canon's 1DX Mark II, that sort of level of pro DSLR cameras and the weather sealing that you'd expect on those, you're going to get it here. And I think flip out screens have always been a little bit problematic for weather sealing, so this might be one of the ways that Panasonic has got around that. So if you're shooting to one side of it, this isn't really going to help you, but if you're on this side, that it is going to provide just enough of a tilt out so that you can see it. So for video use, it's handy. A flip out one would be nicer, of course, but this is going to be just fine for you in most situations. Now I can't open the card slots on either of these right here, so I can't see what's inside and how they look, but we know that they're dual card slots and we know that one of them is XQD and one of them is an SD card. So it's fantastic that they've given us two models. It's interesting that they are different things. We've seen this on quite a lot of cameras, so it'll be interesting to see what of its codecs you have to use the XQD cards for and which ones you can't use the SD cards for. So if you're recording some of the higher formats, it might not function as a dual card slot camera. We'll have to wait and see with that one. It's not like it's got two CFast 2 card slots or two XQDs, something like that. It does have an XQD and an SD. But for the most average sort of use, and particularly for stills, that's going to be brilliant. It's going to give you redundancy and much larger file sizes because you'll have two media in there. You'll get a full-size HDMI port, same as we're used to on the GH5 and the GH5S, and there's also a USB-C port. And then you've got your mic and your headphone up here, and a little remote port, and the flash sync. Now, on the GH5S, they've done some very clever things with the flash sync port and given it time code and all that sort of stuff. So again, we'll have to wait and see whether this can do that. The other main thing that I guess I want to talk about is the IBIS. So they've said that this has the dual IS system similar to on the GH5, and you can see this definitely has IBIS because the sensor isn't locked down in there. So hopefully this will be a full frame camera with just as good image stabilization as the GH5, which is sort of an industry leading camera in terms of image stabilization, particularly when you use it with their lenses. And of course, this is really interesting because you get the full frame sensor that's doing that, but also because it has to work in partnership with the lens. So on the GH5, you have to use one of their Lumix lenses like the 12-35, which we're actually using right now. With this, presumably, you're going to be able to use their lenses, their big professional full frame lenses, which should hopefully be much better optically, both optically and in terms of handling and focus performance and all the rest of it, to their Micro Four Thirds lenses. So it would be interesting to see which ones the lineups that's going to work on and which ones it isn't. So they're being surprisingly secretive about their lenses so far. We know that they've got more coming, but there's 3 ones that they've currently announced. They've announced a 24-105, which is this one here, a 70-200, which we don't have in the room, and this one, which is the 50mm prime f1.4. This is the only one that they've released the aperture rating for. So that's why I mean they're being a bit secretive. They haven't announced what aperture this one is, or the 70-200, and actually when we look at the front of the lens, it's all covered up where the aperture markings are. So who knows what these are going to be in terms of apertures. I'm not sure why they're keeping that under wraps for now. But it feels really weighty. I'd be surprised if this wasn't at least an F4, because it feels decent size, it feels nicely balanced here. It feels very similar to, in terms of weight and balance, to the 24-105s that we're used to seeing from Canon, from Sony, from other manufacturers like that. And the 50-1.4 looks brilliant. It's much larger than some of the 51s that I'm used to in the Sony realm, and it's f1.4. So that hopefully means this is going to be a really solid optical performer. Sometimes just the physical size of a lens is a bit of an indication as to how much glass is inside, what the optics are going to be like, and what the optical performance is going to be like. So obviously with a non-working prototype, you can't really tell anything at all about a lens, so it's all purely guesswork. But seeing it the first time in the flesh and the size and the weight of it, I'm reassured. So obviously this is the first time I've even laid my hands on this. In fact, it's the first time it's really been shown outside of Photokina. And my first general impressions are incredibly positive. Obviously it's very, very early days. We still know very little about this camera. I mean, there's lots here that we need to know before we know that this is going to be what we're hoping it's going to be in many, many ways. So we can't recommend this really without knowing all those little details. But just in terms of ergonomics, I am very, very pleased and very impressed. It all feels very solid, very robust, very professional, and I think that is going to make a big difference to people, particularly if you're used to more professional products, whether that's high-end video products or high-end stills photos. Maybe you're coming from something like a Canon 1DX Mark II, which is a tank of a camera. This is going to feel solid, robust, and reassuring to you, but without that weight and with a much better balance for a small little mirrorless camera. I think this, in terms of ergonomics, is everything I was hoping for. But of course the big question is, what are the specs going to be like? What are the next things that Panasonic are going to announce? Let me know in the comment section down below what you're all looking forward to. What are you worried about? What are you hoping for? What's the big questions that you want Panasonic to answer over the next few months with this camera? And of course, the links down to our website for more information are all down below in the description. Thank you very much for watching. As soon as we get any more information on the Panasonic cameras, I'm of course going to let you all know and jump at the chance to take a look at it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.